listening to the Full Court Press with your host, Drew Duncan. Don't you dare touch that dial. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Full Court Press. I am your host, Drew Duncan. Don't forget, you can find me on social media at DrewDuncan83 on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And I'm also on YouTube just as Drew Duncan. Speaking of social media, it is Twitter Tuesday right here on the Full Court Press. And a lot of questions have been raised to one Dana White of the UFC who finally answered them. Quote, if McGregor comes back in September, that's almost 2 years. That can't happen. It's not fair to everybody else. The belt would have to move on. You do have Khabib versus Tony. We're working on that fight now, and if Conker comes back, he would get the first crack. I mean, it's about time, Dana White. Seriously, man. It is literally about time, bro. I mean, you've been letting Conor McGregor dictate everything about the UFC for how long now? And look, man, I am a Conor McGregor fan. All right. I love the guy. You know, he's really a very true story of grit. If you've watched any of his interviews, he was talking about they would call him a waster and how he started focusing on fighting. And, you know, there were times when they didn't have any money and she would make sure that they still had food in the house so that way he could keep a proper diet and regimen and, you know, just told him to keep going. And now we see what Conor McGregor has become. But you want to know something, though? I am a little confused here, though. And as much as I want to applaud Dana White, there is a part of me that says, dude, pump your brakes, because Dana White's already said that he's working on Floyd Mayweather coming to the UFC. And, of course, if Floyd Mayweather comes to the UFC, we all know what fight that would be, and that's McGregor versus Mayweather. So what do you want, man? Do you want your cake and eat it too? Do you want everybody else to continue to fight for belts and let McGregor just kind of make you those big money fights? Or do you want McGregor to do what he's supposed to do, and that's defend his belt? Because he's got the lightweight belt, and the flyweight belt was stripped from him. It was taken away. Well, McGregor's still on social media calling himself the champ. But he's not the champ anymore. He was a champ, and you could say, though, that he is because, hey, nobody really beat him for it. It's all interim stuff. And I've already done a lot of segments on Tony Ferguson talking about how McGregor needs to unify the belt. He needs to table a third fight with Nate Diaz and move on from that and fight him and unify the belts. I mean, let's be honest, man. McGregor still kind of has the Wheel of Fortune of Destiny in his control. I mean, he could literally look up and go, look, do I want a third big fight with Nate Diaz? Do I want to try and go for a 2-1 victory in that? Do I want to take another fight with Floyd Mayweather? Do I want to see him in the octagon? I saw him in the boxing ring. Can we get him into the octagon, into my world, and hopefully I can destroy him? Or do I fight Tony Ferguson, unify the belt once and for all, the interim champ and the lightweight champ, make it just one championship belt, and end it with that? In September, it will have been 2 years since McGregor has actually defended a title. But even then, when you think about it, in September, to us, seems like once upon a time in a land far, far away. But when you think about a fighter's life and how guys are taking fights now, you know, every 2 months instead of every 3 to 6 months, what it was, or even a Mayweather who was taking fights longer out, especially towards the end of his career. You know, think about the McGregor-Mayweather fight. I mean, that was essentially, a year and a half in the making? You think about how guys fight now, you could say, well, man, September's a long time off, and McGregor will do something, and he's not worried about it. And by the way, from what I've seen, McGregor has yet to respond. He's usually pretty quick, with these things. And I follow McGregor on Twitter, and I haven't seen anything yet. And before I even did this segment, I went on there and I thought, well, maybe McGregor's got something up now. Zero, zip, zilch, nada. I think McGregor's focus is shifting. He's got his gym going. He's been training people. I think that McGregor's taking time to still enjoy his moment with Mayweather. Some people would tell you it wasn't a great moment. Other people would tell you it was a great moment. I'm not going to get into that. I'm not going to dissect it. But his moment was, leading into that fight at least, truly notorious. That's what he calls himself, the notorious one, and that's exactly what it is. Doesn't really matter about Conor McGregor's popularity anymore, does it? I don't think we're at that point anymore with Conor McGregor because I think a lot of people are tired of it. I think a lot of people are tired of watching McGregor dictate everything. He's wanted a piece of the pie from the UFC. He's talked about the comeback. He wants 40% of the stake, and that's all there is to it. And, you know, McGregor's trying to make business moves now, which probably alludes to the fact that McGregor will probably retire, which is something that I talked about long before this ever happened, which is something that Dana White talked about, and that is he feared that if McGregor got the fight with Mayweather, he would probably never return to the octagon. Well, can you blame him? I don't know if McGregor has peaked athletically, but you could almost say that maybe his popularity and financial ceiling have peaked. Of course, then again, people pretty much said the same thing about guys like Mayweather for a long time, and Mayweather fought all the way up until he was 40 years old. 50-0 is his official record, and that includes a win over the notorious Conor McGregor. And whether you like it or not, with Mosley and some of the other guys he's fought, you could say they were past their prime. You could say the refs intervened too much. You could say whatever you want to. You could allude to anything, but the bottom line is he's an undefeated fighter, and he fought all the way up until he was 40, and we said he hit his ceiling how many years ago? He's not getting any younger. He's not doing, but he remains. And he remains a topic of discussion, even in the UFC world. So even though I say maybe McGregor's hit his financial ceiling, and even though I say McGregor has hit his popularity ceiling, the bottom line is he still kind of controls everything when you think about it. Dana White is trying to give the perception of I'm in control here still, when really, bro, the reality of it is you're not. Me personally, what do I want to see? Well, I want to see McGregor fight Tony Ferguson. I don't want to see another Nate Diaz fight. I don't want to see a Mayweather fight in the octagon. I'm kind of over that scenario because I think that we all knew what was going to happen in our hearts. I was rooting for McGregor to win the fight against Mayweather, but he couldn't get it done. And he had several opportunities that he didn't take advantage of because he was, let's face it, uncomfortable in a boxing ring when push come to shove. And I think we would see the same thing with Mayweather. He would be completely uncomfortable in an octagon. So I don't want to see that awkward fight. I don't want to see it just because of all the hoopla that's around it, because when you follow Nate Diaz on social media, on Facebook, like I did for a long time, and I finally just got over it, everything became about Conor McGregor. It got to be really old. And I felt like Nate Diaz became more of a fanboy than he did anything else. And the more I watched him, the more I realized the only thing that this guy ever feels he's ever done in his life is fight Conor McGregor. It's almost as if he's forgot his own previous accolades and just said, I'm done with this. I just want to fight McGregor. I just want to make money. And, when you're a guy like McGregor and you're on the top of the game the way that you are, well, people, you're going to have a target on your back. That's pretty easy to say, isn't it? Look what happened to Ronda Rousey. I think McGregor deals with pressure a little bit better, obviously. But the point that I'm making is this. I just don't want to see that again. We're over it. We all know they don't like each other. Nate Diaz can't stand McGregor. He hates everything that he's about. Look, man, McGregor at some point, I think, needs to defend a title belt. I really do. And I don't think McGregor's going to wait. When this whole thing first came out about Tony Ferguson, and Ferguson was saying that he needs an ass whooping and he's saving his best material for him, and he was, going crazy, on social media and saying all this stuff to TMZ, and I was talking about it. My thing about it is at some point the business has given to you. Now it's time to get back to the business and the fans who have all given to you. It's time to do that by defending your belt and unifying it and making one lightweight champion, a true champion in this sport. It's kind of become the problem, I think, with the UFC. You've got interim champions, you've got real champions, you've got unified champions. It's getting more and more difficult to keep up with. And I think that if McGregor wants to do the right thing, giving back to the fans, fight and defend your title, and giving back to the business, fight and defend your title and make one champion, whether it ends up being yourself or Tony Ferguson, and doing the right thing for the business to make the business get back to where it was before you came along. Look, McGregor took to the UFC to heights unparalleled. And I think that McGregor was kind of the start of the UFC starting to look after that big money fight, right? Before that, they were concerned about putting together good cards, which is what Bellator has been concerned about. Bellator has been putting on phenomenal shows. And look, I've interviewed guys from Bellator. I've interviewed guys from UFC. I've interviewed guys who went from the UFC to Bellator. And the conversations have all been the way that they get treated and the fact that they're not worried about just one or two guys. They're worried about taking care of the entire stable of fighters, and everybody gets a piece. And the UFC needs to get back to that. And I think the way to get back to that is by having a true champion and having a true championship bout. And that bout would be Ferguson and McGregor, period. And everybody talks about the UFC and ratings. Well, it's been the NFL and ratings. It's been, you want ratings to go up, you have to have a true champion, and you have to have a defining moment with that champion. And that defining moment would be Ferguson and McGregor. And I think that it would help bring the business back to an aspect of, look, we're just going to have true champions and that's it. We're not going to do any more of this interim stuff just to say that we have a champion. Because it's getting harder and harder to keep up with UFC fighters or MMA fighters in general. Look, I've talked about this before. Here in Kansas, you've got a lot of local promotions. You've got Shamrock FC up there in Kansas City. You know, so not only do states run their own local promotions, but then, of course, on top of that, you've got promotions that are being ran outside or inside of Bellator and UFC. They've got their stables. You've got the Ultimate Fighter. You've got Bellator Tough. Then on top of that, you've got the actual brands of Bellator and the UFC. And, you know, you think about the UFC and how they've done a lot of their pay-per-views lately, which is they're having prelim fights on Fox. Then they're having prelims again on the internet. Then they're finally getting to the main card, which a lot of times will have 8 fights on it. I mean, it's just getting like, who the hell are these people? And I get that finding a true main eventer is not the easiest thing in the world to do. But I think that at some point, instead of having so many fighters, because you've got to be selective. Yeah, the NFL is selective. There's over 14,000 kids in Division I college football. And there's only 397 guys to an official total 32-team roster in the NFL. They're selective. The UFC should be a little bit more selective as well. The other thing that I really think about is not only is it too difficult to keep up with how many fighters there are, and so because there's so many fighters, it's more difficult, I think, to create main eventers. But I think the other thing about it is when you're not unifying belts and fans are trying to figure out who the hell the champions are, if you want to turn people from being casual MMA fans to regular MMA fans, you have to have a definitive champion. When we watch the Super Bowl this year, if the New England Patriots win, a lot of people will say, man, they cheated, they did this, they did that, we don't like it, et cetera, et cetera. But the NFL will still have a definitive champion because there's only one Super Bowl and 2 teams will play in that game, and the winner will be called the Super Bowl champion. In college football, you may not like the fact that Alabama is the national champion, but we have a college football playoff right now. It consists of 4 teams. Those teams play. 2 teams play in the title game, and that team is called champion. It's definitive. The World Series is definitive. You want people to follow you on a consistent basis. They have to know who the hell your real champions are, what they're fighting for. You've got to play and fight with a purpose. That's the whole thing. It can't just be, the backstory of somebody that makes who they are great. It's got to be what they do inside of their each sport that also makes them great. Being gritty and determined is only part of what they do. People that make it in life did not sit around and wait up for handouts regardless of where you started at. And I love the come up story more than probably anybody. But the point that I'm making is this. The backstory is what draws the fans to that person. allow that person who is so loved and admired by fans to be a true champion. This is the Full Court Press. I am Drew Duncan. Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, it's all at Drew Duncan 83. And, of course, you can find me on YouTube at Drew Duncan. And don't forget to tell Alexa to play the Full Court Press by Drew Duncan. We got a lot more to discuss going forward. It is Twitter Tuesday. Don't you dare touch that dial.